Good morning, boys and girls. So today we are going to continue getting ready for 5th grade with lessons 12 and 13. Now, lessons 12 and 13 should be very familiar to you because we are taking it one step further with adding and subtracting fractions. So this year we learned how to add and subtract fractions with like denominators. But during that lesson, we also learned how to take two different denominators and turn them into common denominators with fractions. I'm reviewing that with you right now before we get into lesson 12 and 13. So in order to add and subtract fractions with unlike denominators, you need to follow these steps. They're in your notebooks for the fractions chapter under changing fractions using common denominators. Okay, so in this fraction addition problem, we have 1/6 plus 3/6. Here, in order to add these two fractions, they have to have common denominators. They have to have like denominators. And so we have to change these two fractions to have the same number of pieces in order for us to add them. So the first thing you need to do is remember least common multiple, because one of the first steps in changing uncommon denominators to common denominators is to find the LCM. Finding the LCM is finding the multiples of the two denominators. So I'm going to take 3 and 6 and I'm going to relist them. Here, I have 3 and 6 relisted, and I have already the multiples for you. I've listed the multiples, and the LCM is the least common one. So the one that they have in common, and that is the smallest one, you're going to use as the new denominator for your new pair of fractions. So as you can see, I've already circled 6 as my least common multiple because it is the smallest number that 3 and 6 have in common when we talk about multiples, because that means that you can make the same number of groups with these two numbers, and that's how we find that they're related. So since LCM is 6 is my LCM, I'm going to rewrite my pair of fractions using 6 as my denominator. After we do this, I'm going to give you a shortcut, okay, to help you better understand and to help you do it a little quicker. So step 1, when adding and subtracting fractions that do not have the same denominator, you need to find the LCM, meaning you need to find the least common multiple. So I rewrite my denominators, I write out my multiples, which I see that 6 is the least. Now there's other ones, but we want the smallest one, okay? So step 2 is to rewrite the fractions using the denominator, using the new denominator. I'm so sorry about that. New denominator, which is my LCM. So like I told you in class, I always like to put my fractions one on top of the other so I can transfer over the information correctly. Now 1/3 and 3/6, now I'm going to use 6 and 6 as my denominator. Now I got to find a fraction that's equal to 1/3 but has a denominator of 6. And remember that we talked about relating these fractions using multiplication, because we use multiplication to find 6. Multiples is multiplication. So 3 times what is 6? That would be 2. And whatever I do to the bottom, I must do to the top. So 1 times 2 is 2. My new numerator here is 2/6. This is telling me that 1/3 is equal to 2/6. So it doesn't matter if I have 1/3 or 2/6. They're both the same fraction using a different number of pieces. Here I'm going to do the same thing with 3/6. Now, what times 6 equals 6? It's 1. So because this is times 1, whatever I do to the bottom, I do to the top, this is going to be 1. And then I multiply, and this ends up being the same fraction, which is perfectly fine. Now I'm going to add my two new fractions, and I keep my denominator, and I add my numerators. And my answer is 5/6. Now, please make sure to rewind this video to review how to find LCM, how to change our fractions into common denominator fractions, and then that's when you add. So step 1 is finding the common denominator between my two denominators. Because these are different, I need to make them the same. I use my least common multiple. I rewrite the fractions using my least common multiple, and then I keep my denominator, add my numerators, and I'm done. In the next video you're about to see, I'm going to not explain this again, but I'm actually going to go through the motions, and then I'm going to show you a shortcut. There's going to be 2 shortcuts that you can use to find the, to add and subtract fractions with denominators that are not the same.